Hello everyone, good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Mondays with Mendy. Today we'll be continuing our discussion into how do we live life in a positive, productive, and ethical manner based on some of the principles that have been celebrated in Jewish tradition for over 2,000 years, highlighted right there in the Torah. And that's the beauty of this weekly discussion, is that we pick one principle, one quality, and we connect the dots and show you how this quality is elucidated and translated into the 21st century simply from the 5 books of Moses. Today's quality is one in short measure, but unfortunately, but a very important quality. It's the quality of humility. Today we're going to talk about why humility is so essential for us as a society to operate, but what does it mean to have true humility? Does humility literally mean simply to think of oneself as a bad person? Does humility mean self-deprecation? Does it mean to think of yourself as totally inconsequential and not be honest with yourself about who you are? What is humility and why is it so important? Of course, there's a story told, a wonderful story told about a rabbi who but always wanted to hear what his eulogy would sound like. Obviously, that typically is impossible. But the rabbi really was dying to hear how he'd be referred to after he'd passed. So he did what he had to do. He faked his own death. That's right. He faked his own death. And sure enough, he's laying in the coffin. And they bring him out to the cemetery. And the eulogy begins. And they're going on and on and on. And it's quite good, actually. He's really quite impressed with the eulogy. But as it starts to come to an end, he realizes that they're missing one important quality. And he just can't allow the eulogy to conclude without him highlighting this very important quality. So he's getting nervous, and finally he finishes speaking, and it's silent. And he opens up the top of the coffin, and he says, "You forgot about my humility." Humility is a buzzword that people talk about all the time, people being humble or arrogant or narcissistic. But what do we truly mean by humility, and how many of us can actually honestly say that we are truly humble individuals? Winston Churchill, who was notably quite witty and always quick on his feet, Mr. Churchill once said about one of his preeminent opponents, one of his political rivals, Clement Attlee. He said about Clement that he's a modest man, but he has so much to be modest about. So you can see quite clearly that Mr. Churchill understood that modesty does not mean the lack of recognition of one's strengths and qualities. Golda Meir would say something similar. Golda Meir, of course, the former prime minister of the state of Israel, she once said, "Don't be so humble. You haven't accomplished that much." So she had a little bit of a different take, but ultimately the same idea that humility is, first and foremost, comes with recognition of what a person achieves. Without recognition of who we are, you can't truly be humble. So humility does not mean to negate our self-worth. It doesn't mean to consider ourselves null and void of no significance whatsoever. That is not the definition of humility. And that's not what we're here to discuss today. Because humility in Torah, in Jewish philosophy, all stems primarily from one individual, the first person to be recognized as a humble person, and ultimately known as the most humble man that ever lived. We're, of course, talking about Moses. In the Torah portion they'll be reading this week, which is the first in the second book of the 5 books of Moses, the book of Exodus, we introduce Moses to the narrative. And Moses was unique because he is known, as it says in the book of Numbers later on, he was the most humble man in the world that ever lived. So what made Moses so exceptionally humble, and why was he capable of humility when at the same time he was the most qualified and accomplished individual that ever lived as well? If you look at Moses' life, Moses was born in Egypt, growing up in the palace of Pharaoh. But Moses was not a quiet, timid individual. Moses' first story ever recorded is that he found a taskmaster beating one of the Jewish slaves to within an inch of his death. As a result, Moses looked left, he looked right. He didn't see anyone that was watching him, so he took the measure into his own hands and he killed the Egyptian taskmaster and buried him right there on the spot. This is the first story that's told about Moses. Alex, drinks, if you want to drink, ask Lauren, and any condiments as well.
Okay, thank you.
Typically, when you think of somebody that's a humble individual, you wouldn't necessarily associate that behavior with the behavior of someone ready to go out and kill someone broad daylight. Regardless of whether or not his actions were justified, that requires a very assertive and almost aggressive personality. Not typically one you would associate with humility. And yet, here it is. Moses, the most humble man ever born, is willing to stand up to protect his people. Later on, when he sees the burning bush, he's called upon by God to lead the Jewish people. He goes into Pharaoh's palace and he tells Pharaoh, "You are to let the Jewish people go." Of course, he's accompanied with his brother Aaron. Again, not necessarily the mark of what you would call a humble individual. This is not a meek, not a timid, not an introverted person in any way, shape, or form. And yet known as the most humble individual that ever lived. So was Moses in denial? Was he delusional? Did he simply not understand what he accomplished and he achieved? Did he not have a sense of his greatness? And therefore he was humble because he did quite a lot. You can't argue with what he achieved. But Moses is not the only Jewish leader to experience this conundrum. In the Talmud, there's an amazing story told about a man named Rabbi Joseph. Rabbi Joseph was a very prominent scholar that lived around the time of the Common Era. Just before Rabbi Joseph came to become one of the leaders of the Jewish people, there lived a man named Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda, of course, was the first individual to start compiling the Talmud, the Mishnah. Until he had come along, it was a collection of sayings that had been transmitted orally, and he began the tremendous work of collecting those sayings and organizing them ultimately for printing so that they would not be lost from the Jewish collective. Rabbi Yehuda passed, and after that, there was a sage that got up and said that once Rabbi Yehuda passed, humility and fear of sin ceased to exist in the world. Rabbi Joseph heard this comment, came over to this rabbi, and he said, "I want you to know that your statement is incorrect because I still live, and I am both God-fearing and I am humble, and so therefore your statement is incorrect." It's hard for us to imagine a person telling people that he's humble and truly being humble. They seem almost oxymoronic to proclaim your humility, and yet that's here exactly what's taking place. Rabbi Joseph is saying, Rabbi Yehuda wasn't the only humble guy. I'm humble too, and I'm still around. So how do you balance the obvious need to be honest with oneself? How do you balance that with the ultimate goal of being humble and modest in the way you conduct your life? Because we see two great leaders who were very intelligent, very aware of themselves and their surroundings, and yet at the same time were fully capable of being humble individuals. Before you understand humility, you have to understand the opposite of humility. If you understand arrogance, ego, and narcissism, you could then understand why humility is so important in Jewish tradition. Because there are many qualities, many character traits that people should ascribe And yet humility is lauded time and time again. In the Talmud it says, Rabbi Levitas would say, be a very humble spirit, for the expectation of mortal man is but worms. He would go around and tell people, listen man, I don't know what you think of yourself, why you're so arrogant, but you came from dust ultimately. And you know where you're going back? You're going back to worms. That's your eventual destination. That's your final landing point. You're going back to worms. He used to use this method in order to bring about a person's humility, reminding them where they were headed. And time and again, we see this great value put on bringing people back down to earth and not letting them get too ahead of themselves, believing too much in themselves. There's another amazing quote from the Talmud that says, any person who is haughty of spirit, that God says regarding him, he and I cannot dwell together in this world. So people will ask me this all the time. Oh, I saw a religious man behaving in this manner. I saw a religious man doing X, or I saw a religious man doing Y. How about a religious man that's arrogant? Well, according to the Talmud, it's impossible. You cannot be a religious man and be arrogant. The Talmud is telling us if someone is arrogant, he consumes his entire being. There's no space for anything else. How can faith, how can God, how can religion be important and play a significant factor in his life? He has no space for it. All that exists is him. There's no room for anything else. So if you tell me you've seen a religious man behaving arrogantly, I will tell you, you haven't seen a religious man. This is the extent that Jewish tradition goes in telling us how important humility is in being a successful human being and in being a faithful, spiritual human being. You must be humble. There's a really cool quote, almost similar to the 12-step program, a quote that leads us on this journey to perfect one's character. It's also from the Talmud. It was quoted by a person named Rabbi Pinchas. Rabbi Pinchas says the following. It says that Torah study brings one to be heedful, to be mindful. And being mindful will bring you to diligence. Diligence will bring you to cleanliness. Cleanliness will bring you to asceticism, to be an ascetic, remove yourself from the physical world. Asceticism will bring you to purity. Purity will bring you to piety. Piety brings you to humility, and humility brings you to the fear of sin. And the fear of sin will bring you to holiness, and holiness will bring you divine inspiration, and that will ultimately bring you to piety, which is the greatest of them all. This is his quote. He lists all of these different characteristics, these different traits, and he tells you that if you start with one, it will ultimately breed another and lead you on this amazing journey. Rabbi Yeshua comes along, he says, no, sorry, you got it right except for the very end. They all bring you to the greatest quality, which is humility. There is nothing greater than humility. So we know that humility is not just another quality in life, it's everything. It's the source for spiritual pursuit. If you have humility, you can then begin your pursuit. If you don't have humility, there's nothing to talk about. There's no space for anything else to exist. And in the same breath, we also have many different quotes and stories and traditions that tell us that a person has to believe in themselves. You have to know who you are, truly know who you are. One of the most often quoted is from the Talmud and Sanhedrin, which says that a person must wake up in the morning and proclaim, an obligation, it says, that a person should proclaim, the world was created for me. You get up and you say, Moda Ani, you show your gratitude and acknowledgement that you've been given another day on earth, and then you have to say, the world was created for me. Not exactly a humble statement, rather one that seems to recognize that you're it. Everything that you see around you is created just for me. It's not the only quote that talks about self-esteem. There's another one that says that a Torah scholar must have 1/8 of an eighth of haughtiness. Haughtiness. You should have a little bit of haughtiness, 1/8 of an eighth. Why? So that frivolous people will not sport with you. You won't accustom yourselves to being around people of lesser moral standard. And so that even your unpopular teachings will be accepted by the populace. If you have no haughtiness whatsoever, you have no self-esteem, then people won't accept what you say unless it makes sense to them. And sometimes they need to listen to you even when it doesn't fully even when it's not fully logical to them. So to do that, you have to have a little bit of self-esteem. That's not all. In fact, it tells us that the destruction of the temple by the Romans came because of a lack of self-esteem. It's a sad story that's told primarily towards the end of the summer when we commemorate the day of the temple's destruction, the 9th day of the Hebrew month of Av. The story is told that the Jewish people are living in Jerusalem primarily, and a man, a wealthy man, invited a bunch of people over to a party. And one of his friends was named Kochba. And he wanted to invite his friend Kochba to join him at the party. Unfortunately, Kamsa, I apologize. He wanted to invite his friend Kamsa to join him by the party. Unfortunately, he sent the invitation to Bar Kamsa. Slight deviation in the name. And Bar Kamsa was his enemy, sworn enemy. For no apparent reason, he didn't like him. What happened? His friend never came to the party, but his enemy showed up. He was invited. In the middle of the party, the host of the party, seeing that his enemy is sitting at the table, a gentleman that he just, for no reason, just didn't like, he asked the man to leave in the middle of the party. And the man was quite shamed. Bar Kamsa was truly embarrassed, being asked to leave publicly in the middle of a party. He offered to pay for his meal. The man said no. He offered to pay for the entire event. And still, the host said no. All the while in front of the most prominent rabbis of the time who were sitting and watching what was taking place, but chose not to stand up and speak their mind. Bar Kamsa was very much offended after he was thrown out of the party. He went to the Roman emperor and he told him, the emperor at the time was Nero, he told Nero, he said, Nero, I want you to know that the Jewish people really don't ascribe allegiance to you. Here, I'll prove it. Take an animal, offer the animal to them, that they should bring it as a sacrifice in the temple, and sure enough, you'll see they won't bring it. He took the animal from Nero. On its way, he caused a slight blemish to the animal. He cut the animal's lip. Knowing that a blemished animal cannot be brought as a sacrifice in the temple. The animal got there, and lo and behold, they presented it to the priest, the Kohen. He looked at it and says, we can't bring it. They asked the rabbis what to do. Again, we might upset the emperor. That comes at the cost, potentially, of catastrophic future for the Jewish people. And again, the rabbi, his name was Rabbi Zechariah, chose not to say anything. He didn't want to assert himself in the conversation. And of course, we know what happened. Nero was very upset, which caused a strain in the relationship and eventually led to the destruction of the temple. So the destruction of the temple came about because of hatred for one another, but it also came about because of false humility. When this rabbi understood this situation, when he saw what needed to be done but failed to stand up with leadership, with strength, with a little bit of haughtiness and says, here's what you have to do, it led to a terrible outcome. So we have a little bit of a conflict here. On the one hand, we know that humility is very, very important. One of the most important qualities a human being can have physically and spiritually. But at the same time, we're also compelled to understand our true greatness, know what we've achieved and accomplished in life. How can you possibly live with both of these concepts simultaneously? So there are a few different approaches in finding the balance between humility and self-esteem, healthy self-esteem. One of the approaches is deprecation. Believing that you are not as great as you think you are. We know that every person is biased towards themselves. We're born with an innate self-love, which tends to conceal some of our deficiencies. So when you are trying to become more humble, there are a set of meditations that you can do, meditations that encourage you to focus on your deficiencies rather than your qualities. And everyone has deficiencies. If you focus on your deficiencies, you will automatically lower your status, lower your stature in your own eyes. And that will bring about humility amongst your friends and your peers and your community, because you'll understand, I'm not such a great guy. Look, yes, I've achieved X, Y, and Z, but look at all of these deficiencies that I have. Look what I haven't accomplished and what I haven't achieved. Look at my failures. I'm a human being at the end of the day, just like everybody else. So that's one method that a person can take. The method of self-deprecation. There's another method that a person can use for humility. And that is the method of, that guy's probably better than I am. So as opposed to focusing on lowering yourself in order to see yourself as on par with everybody else, how about raising up the other individual? Definitely a more positive path towards humility. And it's really not that difficult. Because if you go through the motions and you say to yourself, well, I see that individual's struggles in these areas, but I also know that I struggle in certain areas. And maybe his deficiencies are smaller than mine. You're right, he's not able to accomplish what I can, but who knows how many battles he fights. Maybe this is the only battle that he loses, and he wins all of the other battles that happen in his personal life. And I happen to see the one battle that he loses, whereas myself, I win some, I lose some, I win some, I lose some. So I'm actually batting at a much lower percentage than this other guy is. Right? You can look at a baseball game. We play 140-something baseball games in the Major League Baseball season. If you look at any given game, you can see that people, great players, they go through slumps. Today, on this day, the guy was 0 for 4, didn't get a hit. You might say to yourself, well, that guy's really a horrible baseball player. But that sounds ludicrous without looking at his full body of work. And when you start to look at what he's accomplished last season and this season, you see he has a .333 batting average. Obviously, he knows how to hit the ball. But I happen to see that on this particular day, he had a certain deficiency. It's not reflective of who he is or what he's capable of. And so by looking through this lens at the individuals around us, we instantly raise the status of everybody else, which brings us humility. It brings us in line with our surroundings. So those are two paths to humility. The path of lowering ourselves, or the path of raising those that are around us to where we are on equal footing. There's another path to humility. This is the path of unity. When you recognize that you can accomplish so much and nothing more. Because every human being has a certain potential. They have certain capabilities. They have certain opportunities that are given to them. As tremendous as those might be, they're limited. Without other individuals, we cannot accomplish the general task of making this world a better place. You can't. You cannot perfect the world on your own. You can perfect your piece of the world. You can start this chain reaction. You can inspire people. But ultimately, you need them to do their part if you want to achieve a total transformation. So when you recognize that you're in this with partners, it's like running a business. You might bring all of the money to the table. You've invested $10 million in this business, but you know that you lack the business expertise to actually grow this company. So this gentleman, your partner, is as valuable as you are. Not because he has the money, but because he has the knowledge and the wherewithal to grow this company. You can't get it done without him. No matter how much money you've made, you can't get it done without it. And this is another manner of bringing humility to one's life, through recognizing our shared collective future, the fact that our success is all intertwined. But there's a common deficiency between all three of these methods. And that's the fact that all three of these methods still focus on me. They focus on me. Either it's a story about how bad I am, my deficiencies, or it's a story about the other people, the fact that the other people have more successes than I have. Maybe I haven't seen their successes. so my successes aren't as great as their successes. I don't know. Or it's about the focus on how I can't accomplish everything on my own. I need other people in order to reach our collective goal. But it's still a story about me. So is that the ultimate of humility? To where this is still focused on you as an individual? No. There's a really cool story told about a Passover Seder that happened 300 years ago. And at the Seder was being led by one of the Chabad rabbis, the third Chabad rabbi actually, whom I'm named after. He had the same name, Menachem Mendel. He's sitting at the Seder and he broke his middle matzah. As we know, the fourth step in the Seder is to break the matzah in half. And he noticed after he broke the matzah that one of his students, one of his disciples, had broken the matzah and was staring at the two halves. So he called on the student. He asked him, he said, "What's the matter? Why are you struggling with this procedure, with this step in the Seder process?" And he said, "I can't figure out which half is bigger and which half is smaller." And he turned to him and he said, if you have to measure how great something is, then it's not truly great. Because when something is truly great, when you see greatness, you don't have to measure it. You don't have to take greatness and start describing it, a certain quality, seeing it how much greater it is than this, how much bigger it is than that. No, greatness is greatness, and it's self-apparent. So how do we apply that in our discussion of humility? How do we recognize greatness and at the same time still remain truly humble and grounded in our own self-worth? First and foremost, a person has to understand who they are and what they have achieved in their lifetimes. They have to. And that step is very important for everyone. Without self-awareness and knowledge of our accomplishments and our achievements, a person cannot truly find a sense of humility because they don't know themselves. How can they say they're humble if they don't know who they truly are? So your step one, get in touch with yourself. Sit down. Be honest. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What have you accomplished in this world? But after you've accomplished that, after you've recognized what you've achieved, it's time for step two. And step two is to recognize that your accomplishments, your achievements are not yours alone. You were given gifts. You were given tremendous gifts, talents, and abilities, and wonderful opportunities. And yes, you chose to maximize them, but it was because of those gifts that you achieved success. When somebody wins the lottery, do we go over to that individual and say, wow, how smart you must be, how creative you must be, how charismatic you must be? Why? Because you won the lottery. Look what you've achieved. Look what you've accomplished. No, we don't say that because it was a gift. It was a gift. The same too with our achievements in our life. We are given tremendous gifts, tremendous abilities and opportunities, and that's what brings our success. So do we really have a platform for being arrogant and narcissistic, for believing in our own self-worth, or rather recognizing that all of our accomplishments and achievements have been this wonderful gift that's been bestowed upon us? Moses knew who he was, just like Rabbi Joseph knew who he was. They both understood what they had accomplished in life. Moses knew what he had achieved, without a doubt. He wasn't foolish, he wasn't delusional. But at the same time, he also knew that all of his achievements, everything he accomplished in life, was because of the gift that he was given by his Creator. It was because of the opportunity that he was chosen for. And quite possibly somebody else in that same situation could have done much more. We never know because nobody was or ever will be in the exact same situation as us right now. And we know the story that's told about Rabbi Zusha. Rabbi Zusha, this man named Zusha, he used to sit and he would sometimes cry. And his friends would come over and say, Zusha, what's the matter? Why are you so concerned? What's the problem? He says, I feel like my end is coming. I'm getting a little bit older. He says, yeah, but you're for sure going to paradise. You live such a pure and spiritual life. did so many good things. What could you possibly be concerned about? He says, I'm not worried about the fact that I'm going to get upstairs and people are going to say, the angels, the administering angels are going to say, Zusha, how come you weren't like Moses? Or Zusha, how come you weren't like Aaron? I'm not worried about that. I'm worried that they're going to say, Zusha, how come you weren't like Zusha? How come you didn't live up to your full potential? You didn't accomplish and achieve what you could have. Yes, you did so much, but you could have done so much more. That's ultimately how we begin the journey of humility. That's how we start becoming humble, by recognizing what we accomplished and we achieved, but also understanding that it wasn't us alone, it was the gift we've been given that made us who we are today. And when we recognize that it's a gift, we understand that we have nothing to be arrogant or narcissistic over. We have nothing to raise our own status above anyone's else, because they could have done possibly so much more if they had been given the same exact gift. How do we accomplish humility in practice? There's a book called Obligations of the Heart. It's a really cool book that talks about some of the feelings that one should try to develop to live a moral and ethical lifestyle. It says there that there are 6 benefits to humility. One becomes happy with their lot. They become more tolerant of offenses that are directed at them. They become more favorable in the eyes of others, more able to more easily acquire wisdom, because they're open, quicker to perform spiritual tasks, and they become more acceptable to God, a more spiritually open individual. So humility is a very powerful quality, but it is by no means an easy thing to achieve. Because step 1, as we said, is to recognize and know thyself. And you have to know yourself is not an easy thing. You have to be honest with yourself. You have to be open. Only then can you even work on becoming humble. And being humble means ascribing your successes to a great part to the gifts that were given to you. And naturally, human beings want to take credit for what they've accomplished in this world. We want to pat ourselves on the back and recognize what we've achieved. So being humble means taking some of that credit and giving it away. It means taking some of our achievements and recognizing the partnership that bred those achievements. And that is by no means an easy task. Yet, one of the greatest qualities that humility can give you is joy. Joy. People increasingly in life simply aren't happy. And they ask themselves, why am I not happy? We know the self-help section is one of the largest in the library, in Barnes & Noble, on Amazon.com. It's huge. Everyone's trying to find happiness. They're trying to find satisfaction. Maybe we need to spend more time working on humility, because when a person becomes humble, they become appreciative for everything that happens in their life. When you're arrogant, when you believe that what you have is made by your own hand, you become frustrated when you don't have it, but even more so, you don't become happy when you do have it. You work for your $1 million, you get that $1 million, but you believe that it came about by your own hand. So you're not truly happy, because you say to yourself, what do you mean? I got it because I earned it. There's nothing to be happy about. Of course I had it. It's on the spread of my brow that I made this $1 million. Take another perspective. Imagine that you think of this $1 million as a gift. It's a gift. Yes, I worked hard, but I was given this gift of oratory. I was given this gift of creativity. I was given this gift of intelligence. And I used that gift coupled with this tremendous opportunity I was given at this firm, at this company, at this business, at this synagogue. And because of those gifts and that opportunity, I made the $1 million. Of course I have to be happy. Think about it. Think about a person that wins $1 million in the lottery. How happy they are because they know it was a gift, rather than a person that works so hard and achieves this status doesn't have necessarily the same level of happiness. So I challenge you to set humility as a goal. Don't simply write it off because you say to yourself, well, humility is for the meek. Humility is for the introverted. Humility is for the quiet ones. Me, I'm a born leader. And to be a leader, I have to believe in what I'm doing and be arrogant and conceited. That's the only way to really lead. No. Moses was a leader too. Moses was probably the most effective leader. And yet, in the same breath, he was the most humble man that ever lived. Because he knew who he was. Step one on your journey to humility, know who you are. Know your strengths, know your weaknesses. Chart your accomplishments. Write them down. Everything that you've achieved in your life up to this point. Write it all down. Then recognize that it wasn't you alone that got you where you are today. It's not about you. It's about what you've been given. And that's a tremendous gift. And that's how you've achieved the successes that you've achieved. And the other people in your lives, they're just as powerful as you, and they've been given just as many gifts as you have. Some you may be aware of, some you may not be aware of. So you're no better than any of them. Because you took your gifts and actualized them, and God willing, so too will they. And I pray that you find the humility that will bring you joy and peace in your lifetime, because humility is what ultimately brings peace to the world. When people are arrogant and narcissistic, they clash. We know the laws of physics. Two items can't occupy the same space. But when you're humble, you make space for another individual. So make space for other people in your life. Make space for religion and faith in your life, and you will find greater happiness than you've ever achieved before. As always, feel free to email me with any questions. AskMendy@gmail.com is the email address, askmendy@gmail.com. We will be taking a 2-week break on our discussion over the holiday New Year's season. So stay tuned for further announcements. Tonight, Dina will be leading a cooking class called Shabbat in 60 Minutes. You're more than welcome to attend at Chabad House. That starts at 7:30 tonight, Monday night. And please stay tuned to an important announcement that will be happening Wednesday morning at 11 o'clock, a transformative opportunity that we will be sharing. You can get more details about that tremendous opportunity again at askmendy@gmail.com. And we want to thank you for tuning in. We'll see you again real soon.